Hello, and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft, and the world in between. Let's start with the news from the SAP side of the house. So, what do we have here? I want to highlight one blog post about how to deploy SAP CUP applications anywhere. So this blog post guides you through on how to bring your CAP applications to Heroku and how to Dockerize them, so put them into a container and, deploy them basically anywhere. Now, this blog post per se is, I think, quite a good write-up on that topic, and we all know that that's possible. For example, there is also a talk from Recap by Tobias Hoffmann, how he deployed that to via OpenStack. And well, the interesting point in this blog post are the questions that are below. So if you read the blog post, take a look at the questions below, because there is one question that's simply coming to your mind immediately when you want to deploy CAP anywhere. Besides being it possible, is it allowed? And what about the support? What about when something goes wrong? What if I use the community connectors and so on and so forth? And unfortunately, well, fair, the author cannot give a legal statement because he's not part of the SAP legal department. But, well, that's where the problem still lies. And, well, from my perspective, there has to be some movement. Hopefully there will be some movement, maybe around Tacket or later. But I mean, if it's possible, yeah, it's great. But if I do not get support, how should I put that stuff to production? That's simply a too huge gap. Now, this week, no news from Kima, but there are two quite interesting news from the German-speaking user group. First one, I referenced the tweet by the SAG. There is a so-called Positionspapier point of view document about SAP's cloud strategy, drawing some light from the perspective of the German-speaking user group on technology, functionality, data security, licensing, costs, of course. Very interesting. Unfortunately, only available for members of the DSAG. So if you're a member, you will not have access to that paper, unfortunately. But very interesting read, especially for, well, the group that is addressed there, SAP. Now, there is one second thing that I want to highlight that came out this week, and that's available for everybody. You do not need to be an DSAG member. And that's a survey that was put out by DSAG and the ASAC, the American SAP user group, about the cloud and RISE with SAP. And there are some very interesting points that have been brought up, especially when comparing DSAG and ASAC members, how they respond to it. So there was one question about the general perception of cloud. So what's your perception? Is it more negative, or is it positive, or is it very positive? And surprisingly, or not so surprisingly maybe, for the members of DSAG, 27% have a negative or very negative perception of cloud. In complete contrast to ASAC, where these are only 3%. And this also kind of projects to the other part of the spectrum. So if cloud is positive or very positive, there is 74% of the ASAC perceives the cloud as positive or very positive, whereas it's 64% of DSAG members think it's positive. So there's a huge gap in there, and well, at least from the press release, there is no information about where the problems come from. I would guess, and it's kind of an educated guess, it's because of all the GDPR related stuff, the data security stuff that is opposed on the German companies. So I think that might be a reason. There was also another question around the challenges around the usage of cloud. And also here, there are huge differences. For example, with respect to licensing and costs, 72% of the DSAG members see this as a challenge when using cloud, whereas only 41% of the ASAC members see that as a challenge. Same for data security. And that's, I think, really an issue. 53% of the DSAG members, or of the ones that participated in that survey, I have to say that correctly, see that as a big challenge when it comes to using the cloud, whereas only 25% of ASAC members see that as an issue. And well, with the remaining stuff, well, integration is a big topic for the German-speaking user group. It's not that big topic for the US user group, surprisingly. The rest of the areas are more or less the same. There is a bit of deviation when it comes to educational offerings, but negligible from my perspective. So the main points that hurt are licensing and data security for the German-speaking user group members. So very interesting. And the second part of the survey focused on RISE with SAP, so especially on how familiar are the SAP users with this RISE offering, and that was really surprising. The majority, well, has at least heard of RISE, but they are not really familiar with the offering. So there is quite some room for improvement. I mean, it started at the beginning of this year. We have now 1/2 of the year around. So there is really something to do there. And if you want to learn more about this survey and get more information, what's behind there will be a webcast on the 2nd of August between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. Central European Summertime, where you can register, where the results will be commented by the board members of DSAG as well as of the ASAC. So that's really interesting. That's something that you should mark in your calendar, I would say. With that, I switched to the Microsoft part of the house, and there are some news there. First of all, let's switch to my beloved Azure Functions. There are 2 blog posts that I would like to highlight that are available on DevTO on exploring Azure Functions. So those are 2 really nice blog posts that give you some first insight into Azure Functions. If you're starting your work there, I think they are really helpful to get some first grip on the topic, and from there go on and dive deeper. So the first one is really in general about Azure Functions, and the second one is about Azure Functions coding. However, if you have not yet dig into that topic, I think that's a really fair starting point. And then you can go on, for example, making use of the Azure Functions University that's available. Then to a more advanced topic, there is one blog post about how to use Netherite storage provider in durable functions. I have mentioned that, I think, several months ago that there is now a new storage offering, or a new offering for storage providers for durable function that is available in a public beta. One is you can now, instead of using the classical Azure storage, use MS SQL, and you can use Netherite as a storage provider, which is a combination of Event Grid and Azure Blob Storage. And this blog post guides you through on how you set up things in order to get your durable functions working within Azure, and how to test things if they are working properly. So if you want to start with Netherite, I think that's a very cool point to stop in order to set up things. Then from the area of serverless, one specific topic about static web apps, and it's about adding user profiles to static web apps. So when you use Azure Static Web Apps, you get some basic security platform that's part of the framework. And with this security platform, you also get a basic user profile that you can use within your app. but this user profile is really super basic and not super helpful. But you can enhance that one. And this blog post guides you through on how to add additional information to your user profile and make use of that within your static web app. From the perspective, I think is using the GitHub user info. Yeah, exactly. So it's fetching the stuff from GitHub and then using it within the static web app. And then another blog post that is really cool. And that's about an illustrated guide to Fusion development. So I have mentioned Fusion development several times in this podcast, and it's about bringing together pro code and low code, maybe ending up in bro code, I don't know, but it's called Fusion development. And I think that is really something that's super important in the future, because you will have, no matter on which platform you work, be it SAP, be it Microsoft, be it Google, you will have this, or you will have the need for the collaboration between those different types of developers, and you have to have a common framework around that when it comes to governance, to policies, to deployment, to source code management. And this Microsoft calls this Fusion development, and this blog post really guides you through all the different aspects of Fusion development, the motivation, and also has several links with further information. So really something that you should read. Then we have one person that I have also referenced a lot within my podcast. That's Will Venida, Microsoft MVP, who has done a lot in the area of Azure Functions, and who is now diving into the area of Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. And he offers to accompany him in this journey because he brings out now blog posts, at least he's planning it on a regular basis, about his learning path onto Azure Kubernetes Service. So if you're starting with AKS, that's probably a very good point to follow Will's blogs on DevTO. Then a more, advanced topic in the area of Kubernetes, but something that you might come across when you deal with authorization. So I'm not talking about identity, I'm not talking about authentication, where you have some standardized flows, but about authorization and how to implement that in a, let's say, Kubernetes, I wouldn't say native, but in a Kubernetes friendly way, namely as policy as code. And this blog post that is published within the blog area of Container Solution explains you the problem statement. Why do you need policy as code? What are scenarios where this comes into play when it comes to authorization with delegating authorization? And how to solve those problems with policy as code, namely with the so-called, I have to look it up, Open Policy Agent, exactly, because I always mix it up. It's the Open Policy Agent that's available, and how to make use of that within Kubernetes. So if you are dealing with security in Kubernetes clusters, take a look at that blog post. And with that, let's switch to the area of DevOps. First of all, a quite nice blog post that I would like to highlight, which is available on GitHub. It's about what is DevOps. So it's a very cool, concise collection of what is DevOps, what are the benefits of DevOps, how does CI/CD relate to DevOps, and really important about culture, tooling, then DevSecOps, of course. We are now seeing a lot of extensions, DevSec, BIS, I don't know what, ops. We end up at Triceratops, I don't know. And this blog post guides you through, gives you a really great overview. So that's really interesting and quite concise, cool description on that topic. Then if you're already dealing with DevOps, infrastructure as code, and so on, there is an Azure Funbyte session that took place this week about how to deploy bicep templates by using GitHub Actions. So this session shows you how to do that. Then another news from the GitHub area that you might use for your DevOps stuff, at least for source code management. There is one enhancement in the CodeQL engine for code scanning, which gives you new security levels for security alerts. And this blog post shows you what's behind that. So now if you check your code scanning alerts, you have some tag there which tells you if it's a critical issue, a low issue, a high issue, whatsoever. And this blog post explains you what's behind that severity level that you see at a first glance, but how do you have to deal with that? And then from the area of GitHub, there was also a new session, a new conference that took place, the Global Maintainer Summit 2021. And all the talks are now available as replays on YouTube. I've referenced the playlist on my GitHub repo. So if you want to take a look at that one, this Global Maintainer Summit really focuses on folks who are maintaining software on GitHub, so open source project and so on, and really should help those folks in order to keep maintaining that one. And kind of consequently, there are several blog posts that came out in the area of GitHub. One that I've referenced within my show notes is how to keep yourself healthy as an open source maintainer, especially if you have a large project and you have contributors on that. How to keep your project happy, and what's, I think, even more important, on how to keep yourself healthy, because this could be stressful, this could be challenging, and this blog post gives you some hints, some guidance how you can do that. And there is also a tool that is highlighted on another blog post that I've referenced on GitHub about a minimum viable governance framework in order to give your community and your free or open source projects a certain structure in order to enable the growth of the project without all the downsides that you have, all the pain that comes along when your project is growing. So yeah, that's something that I highly recommend if you're dealing with open source software, if you're maintaining open source software, or if you're contributing to open source software, because you may not obviously see the problems that the maintainer maybe has. And this really gives you also some insight there. Then from the area of, well, different other news from the area of Azure or Microsoft. One thing for the people who are using Azure Spring Cloud, there is a good news because the offering starting from 1st of August 2021 will have some update with respect to the base units that you can consume for Azure Spring Cloud. So they have been reduced in the size, which also means a massive reduction in the price for the base units. And that should really help you to get started with Azure Spring Cloud. And then another blog post by Thomas Maurer about Azure Arc. Azure Arc, as you might know, is the offering of Azure in order to allow you to manage and operate multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments centralized from your, let's say, Azure portal. So Azure is kind of the central spot, and you can then deploy infrastructure, data services, or application services. So you can deploy Kubernetes cluster, you can deploy a virtual machine on-premise if you want. You can deploy a PostgreSQL or MS SQL on-premise into AWS, or even functions, logic apps, API management, and event grid that you can deploy to Azure, that you can deploy to AWS. And Azure Arc is kind of bridging all the gaps in order to do so. And this blog post guides you now through what is in for you, or what should you keep in mind as a developer about Azure Arc. Because usually this topic is more, well, in the area of operations folks, but it's also important for developers. And this blog post guides you through why this is the case. And then there is another toolkit that was brought out by Microsoft. It's a toolkit about working responsibly and having a responsible artificial intelligence. So I think it's getting more and more that you bring in artificial intelligence into your applications. Basically because you have very easy to consume services like cognitive services or even your self-trained AI. And Microsoft now brought out a toolkit that's intending for human AI experience hacks. And this is kind of a framework that delivers you best practices and that helps you with the development, how to do it, what to think about, and so on. And this blog post highlights what's in there, what's coming, what's missing, and gives you some further links on how to deal with things. So I think really, really helpful. Then with that, let's switch to the area between SAP and Microsoft. And here I have two highlights of the week. First one is one very detailed paper about SAP SuccessFactors integration patterns, bidirectional identity integration with Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So how do you integrate Azure Active Directory with SuccessFactors in both directions, bidirectionally? Very long, very detailed paper, not only by SAP and Microsoft, but there have been several other partner companies that have contributed to. And on, I think, 50 pages or something like that, this paper guides you through the requirements and the overview how things get solved and what concepts are there behind the solution. So if you're working or if you have this challenge, then I think this paper should be your first stop. And then, of course, there is, as every Saturday, a new episode of the SAP on Azure video podcast. This time without Holger Bruchelt. I cannot believe that. Maybe he's on vacation, but yeah. But with the usual suspects, so for example, Martin Pangratz. And what they're talking about is something that I've highlighted in the last two sessions, and that's private link. So the private link service that's available on BTP in public beta. And well, it's walking you through the scenario, how you do things, how you connect with this private link service from your BTP to your SAP system running on Azure, making use of the Azure private link service. So if you haven't read the blogs, or if you want to hear a bit more about it and see it in action, then this is your chance. And with that, let's go to the area of learnings and events that come up. First of all, let's start with the learning area. There are two ebooks that are currently available for free, more or less. So you have to put in your name for the first one. And the first one is the Azure Cloud Native Architecture Map book, which guides you or helps you with taking architectural decisions within Azure or with the services of Azure. That's available for free on the Microsoft page. And there is a second free ebook that's available, also in conjunction with Microsoft. It's the Developer's Guide to Azure. And that's also really helpful. It's quite up to date. It's the 2020 edition. And it really shows you all the services and what they are intended to do. So this one really helps you because a lot of services have some overlap within Azure. And when you start with developing, you're always asking yourself, should I take this service? Should I take that one? Should I take both? And this can really help you a bit with this decision making. Now that's kind of the learning via books, and then we have the learning via events. There is one event coming up from the SAP open source webinar series, and that's all about Gardener open source project. So if you want to learn more about Gardener and deploying Kubernetes clusters across every infrastructure, this webinar is something for you. It's taking place next week, July the 27th at 3 p.m. Central European Summertime. So from my perspective, highly recommended to join that webinar. Then in a neighbored area, so to say, also Kubernetes-based, there is one online meetup that I would like to highlight from Civo about GitOps with Argo CD and Crossplane. So it's taking a look at how to do operations, making use of the well-known Argo CD, which allows you declaratively to define target state, how your Kubernetes landscape should look like. And with Crossplane, which is a quite interesting offering that allows you to consume services from every cloud, AWS, Azure, Google, within your Kubernetes cluster as if they were Kubernetes resources. So I think that's a really interesting meetup that's coming up next week, July the 28th. Then, you have heard about Serverless Days, I think, in this podcast several times. And now there is a new edition for Serverless Days, and it's the student edition. So maybe if there's somebody listening who is a student, if there's somebody who's listening and who knows a student who's dealing with serverless, please forward him this information that on August the 15th, there will be a free online conference for students by students about serverless. Then one other heads up for ones who are members of DSAG or who want to go to DSAG Live. There are now the keynotes topics and the keynote speakers available on the landing page of the DSAG Live, which will take place in September, at the end of September. And you now can take a look on the keynotes that take place on the different days, what they are about, and who will talk. So quite a sneak peek to the upcoming DSAG Live. Now, having talked about taking place at conferences, maybe some of you might want to host virtual events or are hosting virtual events. For those, I would like to highlight two resources which are available on GitHub and provided by Microsoft. And the resource, or the main resource, is the virtual events repository that should help you with setting up and conducting a virtual event. So what do you have to think about? What about the code of conduct? They even have a playbook available there. And there is one area which is also really interesting and important, I think. And it's how to create an inclusive virtual conference, focusing currently on the planning process. So what do you have to think about in order to engage with diverse groups? Be it diversity from the perspective of gender, be it diversity with respect to people with problems with the physical ability, with the mental ability, and so on. So that's really something interesting to read and something that you should take a look at when you plan to do a virtual event. Now, with that, it was kind of in between events and developer productivity, so to say. Let's switch to the last area for today, developer productivity. There is one extension for Visual Studio Code that I would like to bring to your attention, and that's called Live Preview. That's under development, and that allows you to preview web apps within VS Code. So you can preview your web projects side by side to your HTML code whatsoever. Keep in mind, it's under development, so might not work perfect up to now, so there might be some issues, but you find everything at the page that I've referenced within the show notes. And then one last thing that really perfectly fits the topic of developer productivity, and that's a blog post by David Schmidt, consultant and architect at Senacor Technologies. If you haven't seen a talk by him, you should really look him up on YouTube. He's giving great talks. And this time he has brought forward a blog post about the value of time. As we all know, currently we are working remotely, we are in home office, and we're getting a lot of remote meetings, online meetings. Well, because you do not have to switch rooms. You do not have to go to different buildings maybe. So what about having meetings from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. without any break? That, I think, does not boost productivity. And this blog post picks up exactly that topic on how to deal with those things and how to get, well, work done again without getting stuck in thousands of meetings. So really a great read, highly recommend it, because I think that's really a problem at the moment. Now with that, I'm through with today's session. I hope I had some interesting news for you. And with that, I wish you a nice rest of the weekend. I wish you a nice week and see you next time. Until then, bye.